Hello and welcome to a new Vanguard Zero video. Today we are going to be taking a look at Spike Brothers, and I'm just going to be explaining what the deck is, how you use it, what kind of combos you want to be pulling off, and why I love it so much. So previously I did a video about Spike Brothers. It was very surface level, where I just put together a very quick and easy Spike Brothers deck and played some games with it, right? Ever since then, they've basically become my main deck. They've become my kind of default go-to deck ever since then. And I want to explain why. I want to explain what cards I've gotten since that point, how I've updated my deck since that point, and yeah, what the deal with Spike Brothers is. So that sounds fun, basically. Yeah. So, Spike Brothers. Let's start with what I've pulled since then. So ever since that previous video, I've got 4 copies of Dudley Dan. I did not originally have him, and yes, to anyone who knows anything about Spike Brothers, you're going to be going, oh wow, you didn't have any of him previously? Yeah, we'll talk about that in a sec. We've also gotten a 4th copy of Skydiver. Unfortunately, I did craft him, so that used up a lot of my materials, unfortunately. So that's not great. But I already had 3, and I felt like I needed a 4th, so I felt, why not, right? We did not get any more triple rares. We only have 2 Juggernaut and 1 Siegfried. Not great. I definitely want more of those, but I do still think this deck is actually alright with what I've got anyway. Yes, it'll be a lot better once I've put more Juggernauts and Siegfrieds in there. But honestly, even with what I've got, I still think it's fine. I've been ranking up some fairly consistent wins anyway, so I don't think it's the end of the world. I'm currently at Legend 15, so I'm not doing too bad anyway. And we also got an SP version of Perfect Guard, so that's pretty looking, I guess. Yeah. So let's look at the deck, right? So I guess let's start with, what are Spike Brothers? What do you want to be aiming for? How are you going to win with them? So Spike Brothers are a deck that revolves around flooding out your field with as many cards as possible, just filling every Rearguard circle, and then attacking with the front row but not boosting, getting rid of the 2 front Rearguard circles and emptying them again, and then using effects to fill those 2 front Rearguard circles again with new units without ending the battle phase, so that you can attack with them still. So that you can get as many attacks in as possible during one battle phase, and hoping that your opponent can't do much against it. That's the big kind of strategy, and this is kind of how you do it. This is the deck I've gone with. I know there are probably better decks out there, but this is just what I'm running, and I'm having some reasonable success with it. So I think it's pretty decent. So first of all is a Forerunner, Mecha Trainer. He is one of the best cards in the game, in my opinion, because if you counterblast 1 and retire this unit, you can add a grade 1 or less card from your deck to your hand. Now, most people, including me previously, were like, oh cool, free Perfect Guard, basically. You're just guaranteeing that you have a Perfect Guard in your hand. But actually it gets better than that, and that's where Dudley Dan comes in. So I've got 4 copies of him, and I'm only running 2, and we'll get to that in a sec, don't worry. So Dudley Dan is a card that when it boosts the Vanguard, you can counterblast to put that card, put a card from your hand into your Vanguard Soul, and call any card from your deck to an empty Rearguard circle. So remember what I said about the strategy of this deck? Dudley Dan is making sure you can do that. So he's very, 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 very good, because every Spike Brothers player is gonna want to use this effect at least once, if not twice. Now, it's an expensive effect, so you're not consistently going to be able to use it, but even just using it once per game is going to turn that game around. Because, and the important part is, you can call any card from your deck. Any of them. That's powerful. That gives you options. There are obviously cards you're going to want to be aiming for, and I'll get to that in a sec. Trust me, we'll get to that in a sec. So there are specific cards you want to be aiming for, but even just that on its own, any card. So no matter how shitty your draws have been, no matter how bad you've used, like how badly you've used up your good cards and everything, the fact that you can choose any card gives you options. You will always have something that you can play with that, right? So that's what you want to be doing, right? Now, one card I'm kind of 50-50 on whether or not I want to run in the deck is Spike River's Assault Squad, because it's a fairly weak grade 1 unit in terms of power, but every time it boosts, you can stand it again. So, you know what I said previously about trying to attack with the front rear guards without boosting them so that you can replace that unit with another card and then boost with them? Well, if you run this card, you don't need to worry about that. You can just boost as much as you want, right? So that's pretty good, but I'm also very happy with the grade 1s I've already got, honestly. This is a deck that I very quickly just went, I kind of just want all the cards, but filled the deck immediately, so I had to be very careful about what I took out, which is a shame. So I like running 4 copies of Wonder Boy just because he's consistent damage. And I like consistent damage. I like knowing I have that 8,000 because if you can boost to that 8,000, that's a lot of damage. Same thing goes for Black Panther. 10,000 damage for a grade 2, that's great. That gives you options. You can definitely get some good attacks in with that, especially if you're boosting him with someone like Wonder Boy, right? So let's go back to Dudley Dan for a sec. The reason I'm running 2 of him is because of our Forerunner Mecha Trainer. So, Mecha Trainer, as we mentioned, you can use him to call any grade 1 to your hand. Well, not call, but just move any grade 2 from your deck to your hand. That's really good. So basically, imagine that you are starting a game with Spike Brothers. You draw your first starting hand, and you already have a Dudley Dan in that starting hand, so you just use this to get a perfect guard. That's really great because you've got a perfect guard in your hand, guaranteed. And if you're running a playset of perfect guards, which you should be, then you can, if you have a Dudley Dan in your hand, then boom, you can call another perfect guard and another. You can obviously only use the starting Vanguard's effect once per game, because unless you can find a way of bringing them back, which doesn't exist right now. But even if you have like 1 Dudley Dan and 3 perfect guards, you can still call that 4th one into your hand. So that's good. You are basically guaranteed to have perfect guards, which is great. So what about Dudley Dan, and why am I running 2 of him? Well, basically, if you don't have him in your starting hand, you want to be using Mecha Trainer on him, right? You want to guarantee that you have that Dudley Dan in your hand. And it's only if you don't have any Dudley Dans that you should use it for a perfect guard, in my opinion. So, you want to pretty much guarantee that you have a Dudley Dan so that you can use his ability, because as we mentioned, his ability is pretty game-changing, in my opinion. So why am I only running 2 of him then? Surely, if you're like, well, if you want to guarantee that you have him, the best way of doing that is to just have 4 of him, and then you'll eventually just draw him. And that's true. But again, this card basically guarantees that you'll have him anyway, because let's be real, if you're counterblasting, your opponent's going to attack you, right? Because that's all you need. You need a counterblast, and that's it. And your opponent's going to attack you at some point during a game, unless they're a VP farmer, but if they're a VP farmer, it doesn't matter anyway, because you're just going to win. So, okay, use that, Dudley Dan. So why not run 4 copies of him? Because he's so specific. He's only useful when he's behind the Vanguard, and that's it. In any other situation, he is really, really bad. And that's fine, right? Because he only has 4,000 damage, and that's not going to help you. And so by running 4 copies of him, you're just clogging your field and your hand and your deck up. Because there are a lot of better grade 1s out there for those other situations, right? Surely you'd rather have a Wonder Boy instead, who has double the attack power, right? And so that's why I'm only running 2. So why 2 then? You know, if you can guarantee 1 in your hand with Mecha Trainer, then why 2? Why not just 1? You can just search for that. Well, because you have to counterblast, which means you're going to be taking damage. And what if the card you place in your damage zone does end up being Dudley Dan? That puts you in quite the pickle, doesn't it? Now, of course, you're probably thinking, well, if that's the case, what about the very unlikely scenario that you get attacked twice or 3 times in that time, and all of your copies of Dudley Dan go into the damage zone? Well, first of all, that's not going to happen realistically. Yes, if you play 100 times, it might happen like once, but those aren't very good odds, and I feel like your deck, like it's it's kind of diminishing returns, I guess. Because it's like, yes, if you put a third copy in, then yes, you're more likely to prevent that scenario and make sure you definitely have a Dudley Dan. But he's not that good. Like, he's really good, don't get me wrong, but I feel like at that point he's doing more harm than good by just clogging up your field and your hand with just 4,000 power, right? So I feel like any more than 2 copies of him becomes troubling. Now, of course, I've heard other people say that they would prefer having 3 copies, and if you prefer having 3 copies, then all power to you. But for me, any more than 2 is just overkill, and it's just ruining the deck, basically. So basically, now we get to Bracky. Bracky is one of my favorite cards in the deck, because basically, when he attacks, you can Soul Blast to get an extra 5,000 to the end of battle, which is 14k, which is very, very, very good for a grade 2 unit, by the way. Yes, you're using up Soul, but that's fine. And then you put him to the bottom of your deck at the end of the battle. That's his big downside. His big downside is that you're getting rid of him after you use his effect, which isn't great, right? Surely if you have a big attacker, especially a grade 2 intercept, you want to keep it on the field at all times so that they can use their intercept, right? Well, actually, no, you don't really want to. Basically, as I mentioned, the whole point of this deck is you want to get rid of cards. Because let's go over to one of the best cards in the deck, Siegfried. Because when you boost with him, and your drive check reveals a grade 3 unit, you can call him onto an empty Vanguard circle. And this is where the deck gets really kind of insane, and when you start to really see its true colors. Because what you want to do is, as I mentioned, you want to flood your field out, completely fill it. You want to attack with units like Bracky, for example, whose effects cause them to get rid of themselves. And also, by the way, his effect gives him 5,000 power, which means you probably don't need to boost with him, which means you're saving that boost for later. So you attack, you get rid of him by using his ability, and not boosting because you're already using his ability that gives him 5,000 power anyway, so that'll cover the boost. And then you want to use an effect like Siegfried, for example, by attacking with him, drive check, you get a grade 3, and then you call Maximum Juggernaut on the field. Basically, that's how this deck works. So, let's go a bit more in depth as to all the different ways you can do that, because that's just one example of a chain like that you can pull. So, you want to have Unite Attacker. He's one of the best cards in this deck. In fact, I say that for a lot of the cards. Honestly, this clan is nothing but good cards for the most part. Like, they're all pretty solid. There's a couple that are a bit iffy, but for the most part, there's a lot of solid cards here. So, Unite Attacker is your main source of soul charging, which is good because this deck definitely requires some soul blasting. Not as many as certain other decks, but it definitely needs it. You need to have a method of soul charging. Now, of course, luckily for the first few turns, the soul that you build up just from riding each turn should be enough. But once you get to the point where you have grade 3s, you're going to want a method of soul charging. So when you're only at grade 2, for example, you don't need to worry about it too much because you're going to have a soul anyway, consisting of your grade 1. But by the time you hit grade 3, you want to have Unite Attacker on the Vanguard, right? Because I don't even necessarily care too much about his Mega Blast ability, which is good. It's fine. Because his Mega Blast ability lets you just fill the field, which is good for Spike Brothers, but it's not necessary. Honestly, it's his soul charge that really makes him useful. And then you want someone like Skydiver, right? Skydiver's a really good card. I've been saying this for basically all of them. But when he attacks the Vanguard, you can put him in your soul to call a card from your hand. Once again, you're chaining attacks. And what makes this really interesting is it's not like someone like Nova Grappler, for example, where you're filling the field and then just standing those same units over and over again. What makes this interesting is you're actually cycling out lots of different cards and using different cards and just switching up the field, which I think is a bit more interesting and dynamic personally. It makes the deck a little bit more difficult to kind of keep track of and master, but to me that makes it more satisfying whenever I do get a win with them. Whenever you get to that moment where everything kind of clicks in your head and you go, oh, I know what I'm doing here. It takes a few games to kind of get used to, but you do eventually get used to it. And of course, we've got Dudley Dan. So you want to be having units like Bracky, or even like Reckless Express, who, once again, when you have abilities like that, you get rid of them, because then you can use Dudley Dan, boost with the Vanguard, get another card out. Basically, if you're running against someone like Grand Blue or another deck that heavily relies on intercepts, shouldn't be a problem because you're getting rid of them, and then you're also getting rid of your own intercepts and other front rear guard cards and replacing them, and then you're able to attack again anyway. So it doesn't matter, basically. Which I think is a very good way of getting around intercepts, actually. It's very brute force, but I like that. And we haven't even fully got onto Maximum Juggernaut yet, because he is basically just, well, he's a stronger version of Bracky, but the way I like to describe him is he's Lozenge Magus on steroids. So you know how in Oracle Think Tank, Lozenge Magus is a heal trigger that you can keep putting back in your deck. Every time you boost with Lozenge Magus, you put her back in your deck again, right? So that, and she's a heal trigger. So basically it gives you an extra trigger that you're eventually going to get. Well, Juggernaut Maximum is also that. If you're running Juggernaut Maximum and you don't have him as your heal trigger, then do that, basically. Because, well, yeah, he is a better version of Bracky, which means that he has more power, and he also has that ability that gives him 5,000 extra power as well. So that's 16k from one Soul Blast, which is really good, and that's not even taking into account the fact that you may or may not have a boost behind him at that given time, and that boost is probably going to be someone like Wonder Boy or Recklessness Express, which is a lot of power, a lot of power in just one move, which is good because, again, as I mentioned, you're going to be getting a lot of attacks in on your opponent in one turn and replacing all the units and stuff, and chances are Juggernaut is going to be one of the last units you attack with, and so your opponent would have gained quite a lot of power to kind of like defend with on their Vanguard just from taking so many attacks. And so Juggernaut Maximum is basically guaranteeing that you are getting another attack in anyway, whether they like it or not. There's a reason he looks like that in the artwork. It's because he just punches everyone to death and it works. But also, you can get rid of him and put him back in your deck. Now, the big downside, the worst thing about him is that he doesn't shuffle your deck. That's the only downside, so you're gonna need to have a way of shuffling your deck if you want to get his heal trigger anyway. So that's the biggest problem, but you have Juggernaut Maximum, and you're getting him out in the field, and basically you want to create an endless cycle of getting him in and out of your field. So you want to send him out, attack, put him back in your deck, and then on your next turn, send him out, attack, put him back in. And you basically just want to keep doing that, and of course, the more you put him in and out your deck, the more likely you are to pull him to heal trigger, which is sick, basically. And this makes for a really interesting deck because it basically makes you almost impossible to deck out. Because, well, your main strategy revolves around putting your cards back in your deck again anyway. So, well, yeah, how are you going to get decked out, really? And that's good because it makes for a really interesting deck because you actually have pretty decent draw power if you're running draw triggers. That's the important part. You have to be running draw triggers in some way, shape, or form in this deck. But to be fair, I feel like you kind of have to be running draw triggers anyway. And so this means that you're drawing a lot of cards, but you're also not getting much closer to decking out, at least compared to stuff like Oracle and Grand Blue, which is great. Now, I think 9 draws is a bit overkill. That's the thing. I'm still not the best when it comes to triggers and everything. I feel like it's up to just your personal taste. Definitely have 4 heals. Definitely make them Juggernaut if you can. Definitely have some draws as well, because you're going to want some draw power, because again, whilst you are putting cards in and out of your deck a lot, you still want to be able to flood the field, and if you want to flood the field, you still want to have that draw power, right? And of course, you want to be able to draw your perfect cards, because if you're getting rid of your intercepts on a regular basis like this, then you're going to have to tank some hits. Now, luckily, again, Spike Brothers is one of the clans that you're most likely to get all of your perfect cards with anyway, mainly because of this, because again, if you start with Dudley Dan in your starting hand, then you can just use that on one of your perfect cards, right? So you're gonna have perfect cards. and you're going to want to use them to tank hits. Unfortunately, that's kind of one of the big. It's a glass cannon, right? It deals a lot of damage, but it also comes down pretty easily. But that's fine because you're dealing a lot of damage, right? You just want to tough it out and just hit them twice as hard as they hit you. So that's basically the deck, right? That's basically my current Spike Brothers deck. I'm running crits just to make sure, like, again, I'm not the best with triggers. I'm sure that with stand triggers, this could be even better because you're just chaining even more attacks on top of just ridiculous amount of attacks you're doing anyway. And that's the cool thing about Maximum Juggernaut. If you don't want to get rid of him, then you can just not use his ability. See, if you don't use his ability, he stays on the field. You get to choose whether you want that or not. So if you want to keep the 11k damage unit on your field, then you can keep him on there. Just don't activate his ability, right? So you're only getting rid of him if you're doing that. And so if you don't get rid of him and you don't use ability and then you get a stand trigger, oh look, you know, like, so there's always that. Like, and so I do think that if you run stands instead of crits, that's definitely viable. And it lets you chain even more attacks on top of each other. But at that point, I'd rather just go for crits because, you know, it gets rid of your opponent's perfect guards early on so that they don't have anything to guard with once you do start chaining these together and everything. And there's been a lot of games I've won just by getting that crit during my last attack. You know, they're 2 damage away from losing. I only have 1 attack left. Oh, I get a crit and I just immediately win because I've already wasted all their perfect guards using the other 3 crits in previous attacks. So there's always that, right? Again, not the most consistent in the world, but also kind of very consistent because let's be real, right? That's one of the things that's very good about this deck. Ever being frustrated about having bad draws? Well, this deck's full of cards that guarantee your strategy. Again, you have Mecha Trainer, who guarantees you have the grade 1 you need any given time. You have Dudley Dan, which guarantees you're calling out any card from your deck onto your field. You know, like, you have a lot of cards out here that guarantee your strength. Like, for example, Siegfried, we haven't really talked much about him, but remember, his ability is that you can just call your trigger onto the field, which is ridiculous. Like, it's kind of telling of how powerful this deck is that we haven't even talked about that ability much. Like, holy shit. Like, and you can chain that with Skydiver, right? Because if you're attacking with Skydiver, getting rid of him, oh, by the way, he's our crit, which means that we're shuffling him back in the deck over and over again. But like, yeah, we're calling out Skydiver, and we're getting rid of him, and we're putting him in our soul, and then we're using Siegfried, and then we're getting another Skydiver. Which is why you want 4 copies of him, by the way. Because, yeah, you're putting him in your soul. You're not putting him back in your deck. Hadoy. Problem with unscripted videos, hey? But, yeah, basically, it's really solid. Like, if you're running Spike Brothers, then you don't mind what you get for draws. You need a particularly atrocious first hand and mulligan for you to have bad luck for the rest of the game. But that's it. If you even get a somewhat decent hand starting off, you're still doing well. And again, like, you still have the consistency cards too, like Black Panther and Wonder Boy, who make sure that even if you have the worst hand and field in the world, you still have some consistent damage anyway. So you don't need to worry about that anyway. So that's my Spike Brothers deck, basically. I really, really, really like them. Like, I really like them. Honestly, might be my favorite of my decks right now out of any of them. And the cool thing is yeah, they're good. Like, they're pretty good. I've been getting consistent wins with them. Like, again, if you look at my rank, I'm at rank Legend 15 right now, which isn't all too bad, all things considered, right? Like, obviously there are people higher than me, but I haven't been playing as much as I want to. I still want to play a little bit more. And, like, that's not bad. Like, I've been playing a little bit with them, and I've been getting a lot of wins. So that's my Spike Brothers deck. I'm sure there are better ones out there, but that's just the one I like playing with. And of course, basically, the only advice I have for my own deck is get rid of the Cray Elementals and replace them with more copies of Juggernaut and Siegfried. But that all just depends on whether or not I can get them. But again, even without them, still a decent deck, right? It's still fully playable. So yeah, I'll see you back here later with some more Vanguard Zero videos.